Many patches ago, this tank was one of the worst performing heavy tanks at tier 10. It was then buffed to a state where this tank was so overpowered that people were pulling out 6,000 average damage per game. It has since then been hit with the nerf hammer, and it's kind of irrelevant, but then still kind of okay at the same time. This is the M454, and should you bother grinding it? So in this video, I'm going to be speaking about the entire line of the AMX M454 and whether or not this is worth your time to go down it. As always, this is just my opinion, and if you don't agree with that, then that is fine, but I'm giving you my input into what I think about each one of these tanks moving up to the M454. So without further ado, let's begin with the low tier enjoyers. Now, starting out at tier 1 with the FT, you're not going to be here for very long. In fact, you may never even see this tank or even play this tank because of the way World of Tanks is nowadays. In fact, you might not even see tier 2. Most people are probably going to start their journey down the AMX line at around about tier 3 with the Somwa S35. However, going back to the tier 1, if you are going to be playing it, this is just your average tier 1. It's not going to take you very long to go and get the XP needed for the tier 2, so only a few games really. Moving up to the tier 2, the FCM36, this is exactly the same kind of story. You're not going to be spending too long here. It's not an insanely good vehicle. It's not a useless vehicle. It does have some good armor at the front, but that's about it. Around the sides and the rear, not so great. The Somwa S35 though is where things start to get interesting, because this is one of the best seal clubbing tanks if it was German. The German alternative being the Panzer S35, and this is what a lot of seal clubs choose to go and pad their win rate. Now, this thing has decent enough armor, you can side scrape with it, and the gun is pretty reliable too. If you use the tier 3 top gun, you get 55 average damage with 66 pen and 98 pen if you use the premium round, which means that you'll go through pretty much anybody that you're going to be facing. So the tier 3 is pretty great. The tier 4 is also pretty insane, especially considering that because this is a heavy tank at tier 4, it will never meet tier 6s. You can only meet one up at tier 5. And yes, the alternative German version is the Panzer B2, which again is one of the seal clubbers' top choices. This tank is pretty insane. It has very, very good hull armor and sides of 60mm, meaning that you can side scrape very effectively in this tank. And considering that you do get a very, very nice gun as well, the same gun as the tier 3 version, this is very, very good. The massive benefit though with it being on this tank is that your rate of fire goes up by a lot and you get a lot more DPM. So the B1, very good as well. Moving up to the BDR at tier 5, and this is where it starts to become a true kind of heavy tank, because up till now you could play the B1 like a medium tank. You can play this exactly like a heavy tank or a medium tank, even though it's a medium tank. But when you get to the tier 5, this is where it becomes a heavy tank. But don't get carried away thinking that it has loads of armor, because you actually get less armor on the sides now from the predecessor on the B1, and you have basically exactly the same armor at the front. So you are pretty squishy for a tier 5. You do, however, get a really, really good gun. You get a 90mm gun with 240 alpha and 135 standard pen. This at tier 5 is super, super good. If you hit someone with 240 alpha, that is going to be half or even more than half of their hit points gone on some occasions, depending on what you're seeing. Even if it's shooting against itself, the standard durability of this tank is 870. So if you're hitting for 240, you're going to quickly whittle him down to nothing. Now, even though that the gun reload time is 10 seconds, that isn't actually that bad. You still have 1,440 average DPM, and the dispersion isn't that bad either, although aim time can be a bit annoying. But just make sure that you're going up close and personal. Don't try and snipe with this thing. It's not going to work. And avoid exposing yourself, because it's just not going to end very well. This thing, for all intents and purposes, doesn't have armor, okay? Basically play this tank like it has no armor at all, and you should be fine. So from tier 5 onwards, I'm actually going to rate these out of 10. So in this tank, I'd probably give this about a 6 out of 10. It's good, but mainly only because of the gun. The ARL-44 is okay. I think that's the best thing you can say about it. It's not a very, very good tank. The problem is with this vehicle, it has no armor and it's kind of a very big target. The options of guns that you get is a choice between two that are similar, but also not so similar. The two guns are horribly inaccurate and quite annoying to play with, to be honest with you. During the current Battle Pass, there is basically a premium version of the ARL which uses this 90mm gun. You get two 12 standard rounds and two 5.9 premium rounds. However, it is horribly inaccurate at 0.38 and it has a 3.4 second aiming time. It just isn't very nice to play. However, because this is the tech tree version, you do have the option of playing with the 105mm, and that's probably what I would recommend most people to play with. Now, this is an extremely pay-to-win gun if you would like it to be, because you get the standard 300 alpha with 175 pen, or you could pay the premium version of getting 223 pen and 330 alpha. This is one of the only guns in the game that actually functions this way. You do have more DPM than the 90mm gun, and you do have the exact same aim time and worse dispersion. So if you think that this gun is bad at hitting stuff that you aim at, this is going to be even worse. And all of this kind of just equates to the tank just being very annoying to play. It has no armor, the gun is horribly inaccurate, and the only good thing is the penetration in the alpha. So this tank, like a 4 or 5 out of 10. It's not great. It's really not. The aim time really lets this tank down. Moving up to tier 7, this is where things start to become a little bit more of the characteristics of the higher tiers. So the tier 9 and tier 10. And this is because you start to gain some form of armor. Not a lot. You're not going to be bouncing everything, but you have some form of armor. You are now up to 110 at the front, and because of the way this tank is, if we go ahead and preview the vehicle, you'll see that that 110mm of armor is fully angled as well, meaning that the effective armor is going to be even greater. So if people do shoot your upper hull, they're probably going to bounce. If they're equal tier, higher tiers are probably not going to struggle at all, but most people that shoot your upper hull are going to be getting a bounce, especially if you are hull down a little bit and able to increase that armor effective angle even more. One of the best things about this tank is that it does have minus 10 degrees of gun depression as well, so you can fully use this upper hull to the full effect. Now, the turret, on the other hand, is, well, I mean, it's okay. However, it does have a cupola at the top. And also considering that this is a tier 7, you're going to be struggling because a lot of tanks now have over 200 pen that you're going to be facing, and they will go straight through your turret cheeks either side, which is super annoying. So overall, I would say, yes, you can definitely brawl with this tank, but I wouldn't unless you need to. So overall, I would say that this tank is probably a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty reliable tank, especially with the gun, because if you use this 90mm gun, you remember that really, really bad gun from the previous one, the 90mm? The exact same guns on this. However, you have more DPM, you have better dispersion, and you have better aim time as well. You could even go ahead and use the full pay-to-win gun as well. The aim time has improved. However, I'd probably just use the 90mm gun as it's a lot more reliable. So overall, a 7 out of 10 for this thing. It has armor. Don't rely on it, but it should bounce some stuff. The AMX 65T, which is one of the worst tier 8s in the entire game. This thing is a horrible vehicle. As you can see, gone is the super sloped upper hull of the last vehicle, and here we have a piked nose design, which is not going to stop anything. And I'm not joking, it literally doesn't stop anything. And when you upgrade the turret, it's actually a downgrade, because you go from having this to this. You go from having a somewhat small cupola and only really able to shoot you in here and here if they want to actually pen you reliably from the front and they can't see that cupola for whatever reason, to then just having this monstrosity on top of the vehicle right here and a basically perfectly flat turret face as well. Yeah, this vehicle's horrible. It really is. And this is the tank that also stops at side scraping, because you cannot side scrape because of the piked nose. As soon as you side scrape right or left or whatever you want to do, this then becomes flat and they're easily pennable. In the previous tanks, such as the M445 or even the ARL, you can side scrape. Not so much in the ARL because there's actually a pennable shot straight through the tracks, but you can side scrape. But from here on out, there's no more side scraping because there's always a spot on the tank where you are then just able to be shot at, and it's basically flat as soon as you side scrape. The only real amazing thing about this vehicle is the choice of guns. You get a 100mm gun and a 120mm gun. The 100mm gun is very nice. You have 232 penetration standard with 300 alpha. You then have 263 pen if you'd like to use the premium rounds with that same 300 alpha. You do, however, have 3.2 second aiming time, which is not great. However, the dispersion values is not too bad at 100 meters at only 0.34, meaning that if you use stab and keep that bloom down, it shouldn't be that bad. On the other hand, you could use the 120 and then have 225 standard pen with 400 alpha and 252 premium ammo with that same 400 alpha. You have more DPM than the 100mm gun. You have a better aim time. In fact, a much better aim time, and only slightly worse gun dispersion at 100 meters. So if it was me personally, I'd probably choose the 120, but you could be very, very happy with only the 100, and then you won't have to go ahead and spend that 46,000 XP to go and get the M451. So AMX 65T, how would I rate this? 3 out of 10. Like this is a horrible vehicle. The only good redeeming feature is the gun, but because it's tier 8 and everything else will just kill you instantly, it's not a fun tank. The AMX M451 is one of the best tier 9 heavy tanks in the game, and it always has been, and it still is now. When you look at this vehicle, you may think, what on earth is that? Why does it have the AMX 65T turret on top of the vehicle? And that is because it's stock. Try to get the turret as soon as possible. The good news is that you do have a 120mm gun straight away, so you do have the opportunity to go straight and get the turret. And my god, should you do that as soon as possible, because it goes from looking like this to this. Not only does it just look 10 times better, the turret armor increases exponentially. And I'm going to say it, it's one of the best looking tanks in the game. I really, really like the look of this vehicle. You have super, super bouncy upper hull armor right here, and as we discussed earlier, you can't really side scrape because as soon as you do side scrape, this part here then becomes flat and they can shoot you. But the really good thing about this tank and the tier 10 is that you can bait shots into your lower plate. This tank even more so than the tier 10 version, because this lower plate is angled so well that a lot of APCR will just bounce straight off and almost become an auto ricochet angle. It is so close to becoming an auto ricochet if they're a little bit taller than you that you can just go out in front of them. They shoot either the upper hull here and they bounce off, or they shoot the lower plate and it bounces off. So instead of side scraping with this tank, try and bait out your front around the corner and then just get them to shoot it. And they'll probably bounce and you can go and take the shot and then back off again. Or play completely hold down. You only really have to worry about these two cupolas at the top here. And that is because it's further back, you don't have to really worry about them too much, especially if you're using gun depression. Apart from being one of the best looking tanks in my opinion, the grind is one of the best as well. You get the better gun at the start, which means that you don't necessarily need to go for the next gun, meaning that you can save some XP, which would cost you 63,000, and you can just go for the tier 10. Now, comparing these two guns side by side, you'll see why the left-hand side one, the 120, is slightly better, because even though that it gets slightly less DPM, the standard rounds are much, much nicer at 257 compared to 242. Bearing in mind, these are both AP rounds. And then you have the premium rounds of 315 APCR versus 270 AP. Now, 270 AP is by no means bad, but it's definitely not 317 APCR. You get better accuracy and you get better aim time, meaning that this vehicle is just so much nicer to play with the gun with the smaller version than the big version. Not to mention that there is only 70 alpha difference between these two guns. So is that 70 alpha really worth it? I don't think so. AMX M451, like 9 out of 10. It's not quite a 10 out of 10, but I'd say 9 out of 10. And then we come to the M454, the tier 10, the one you've all been waiting for, the one that you have spent all your time grinding all the way up to go and get. Let's first talk about the guns. There are 2 guns to select on this vehicle, and both of them will work. It really just depends on where you play and how you play as a player. You will get exactly the same style of gun as the previous tank with the 120 caliber, giving it 400 alpha. However, you get 270 standard pen being AP and 315 premium pen with APCR. You have exactly the same DPM as the other gun, 2400. You have better accuracy and much better aim time. And one more thing that we really need to speak about with this choice of 2 guns is the soft stats. Now, I haven't spoken about this in the previous vehicles because I'm lazy and I didn't look them all up. However, with the guns for this, you can go without stab on the left-hand gun, the 120, but with the right-hand one, it's kind of a little bit more questionable if you should get rid of stab. So why did I say that it depends on the player? Well, it depends on the player purely for, do you want to have the alpha damage? If so, go for this gun because it's going to give you better alpha. But also, do you want to fire a lot of gold rounds? Because if you fire nothing but gold, I would say that this tank is going to treat you better with the bigger gun than the smaller gun. Because that 296 AP round will shred most things that you come up against. And then it has 560 alpha as well. Remember, you have both exactly the same DPM. You're not losing out on DPM if you use the bigger gun. The only thing that you lose out on is reload time. This has a 14-second base, and this has a 10-second base. It is a little bit more inaccurate, and it definitely does have more aim time for the bigger gun. If you are more free to play and you don't want to fire a lot of gold, left-hand gun, that's your choice. 250 pen in nowadays World of Tanks is not very nice to play with, especially against very heavily armored tanks. So a lot of the time, you're going to be forced to fire premium if you use the big gun. Whereas with this one, 270 is enough to get through most things, and then you still have that 315 APCR if you need it. And now let's talk about the armor, because this armor is very similar to what you get on the AMX M451 at tier 9. The lower plate is a little bit bigger though, meaning that it's a little bit easier to hit this lower plate than it would be on the tier 9, which is why I said that it's probably a little bit better on the tier 9 than it is even at the tier 10. However though, this tank still looks absolutely insane and is definitely one of my favorite looking tanks. As you can see right now, I'm using the small gun and we have HP turbo rammer. If you were using the big gun, you would then have to have the decision of, do I use stab or not? And then you're going to have to replace something. In my opinion, I would probably replace the turbo and go for HP rammer stab. Although if you don't like the top speed only being 35 without the turbo, then obviously switch out the turbo or the HP with a turbo, so you'd have turbo rammer stab. But with the small gun, you can use the god tier HP turbo rammer. So you join me on Fisherman's Bay. Now we are using the small gun to first show you what the tank is like with this. However, we are using HP rammer and stab with the snapshot directive. Now the snapshot directive I just left on there when I wasn't using stab, just to try and get the turret dispersion down even more. You don't necessarily need that. The tank is more than good enough even without the stab and without the directive. So don't feel like you need to have this. It won't make any difference realistically. So that's there just for a bit of fun. I kind of went full gun handling for this, excluding obviously vents or IAU or something like that, because I obviously want HP. But this is just to see how good the gun handling is, and who would have guessed? If you have god tier gun handling without stab, you have god tier gun handling even more so with stab. Yep. Also, the enemy artillery drowned. What a lovely player. I mean, I don't know why he bothered going into this game, but there you go. I mean, thank you. I now no longer have to worry about artillery in this game. That's a plus. But as you can see, gun-wise, really, really nice. It doesn't bloom at all, obviously, with that stab. Do I recommend this? Probably not. I mean, I probably recommend that you go without stab, as I said beforehand. But with stab, it definitely doesn't move at all during movement. Like, look at the bloom. It's beautiful. And honestly, this is the type of thing that you want to do in this tank. Come out around the side of the... Wow, really? I love the camera system in this game, actually. You know what? I'm just going to play it because I can't. Thank you, Wargaming. You come out around the corner like this so that you're just exposing your upper hull and the lower plate, and you're not exposing the corner bits of your tank. Thank you. I mean, eventually I managed to show you it, but... Can we also just speak, just quickly? I've tried to do this video twice now, where, being in a replay, the replay system is awful in this game. It genuinely is. You try and do something, half the time you go back in a replay and it crashes the game, and you go forwards in a replay or it crashes the game, or something else happens and it crashes the game. It's lovely. I love the replay system in this game. Anyway, besides the point, trying to get some shots into the T10. We know he's there. I mean, you know, he's managing to shoot us unspotted, which is, to be honest, impressive, considering his tank. Doesn't get a lot of gun depression either there. But here we have big problem. So our chief is in the middle of the map. I'm guessing going hold down and trying to, you know, shoot people from the mid. But here we have E100, 452K. God knows what else might come over this way. And all we really have is a BZ68 and our 50B at the back of the map there. The E100 seems to be a little bit preoccupied with the middle of the map. And then just kind of forgets that I exist. I think we also switched to APCR now because even though that a 270 pen is really good, it's not going to quite cut it against an E100 unless we go for like the top of the T-bar. So you can go and do that and it works out well. Get a nice tracking shot onto him. Also, whenever I get a tracking shot, I'm then reminded that I could then perma-track this guy, or potentially perma-track him. So if I get the first track, I know that he's probably used his repair kit. And if he just stays there, I know that he's probably not got his repair kit. So that means that I can then just keep perma-tracking someone. But this doesn't actually look too great for us. And what is wrong with E100s in this game? I think I'll try and track him again. Yeah. See? Wonderful. We even set him on fire for 96. He has a automatic fire extinguisher. But this is what I mean. If I ever see someone that I know has been tracked, I'm always trying to track him again. Also, a quick tip. I know this is a little bit off topic, but if you change the markers to HP/total, you'll then know if someone's using hardening. If you learn about the HPs of all the vehicles and stuff like that. So you'll get to then learn when someone's using hardening, when they're not. So for example, the Super Conqueror, the Super Conqueror changed. I don't know his HP anymore. Does he have 2,400 by default now? I can't actually remember. Wow, okay. That's quite embarrassing. But 452K is, because he doesn't have 2,750 hit points by default. So, for example, that means that then I'm probably going to have to put 2 shells into his tracks, unless he's using the left-hand field mod. Again, you could go and watch my video on how hardening and how it all works combined with the field mods. That's probably one of the best videos I've actually made, educational-wise, on the channel. Here's the thing with this tank. Even though that it is very, very nice to play, there's better tanks. And should you grind this vehicle is one of those questions where it really depends on what else you haven't already got. Because I don't think there's any real point of grinding this tank if you've not got an E100. If you've not got a 277. Because even though the E100 is definitely not really the same, because it's a bit slower overall, it feels nicer to play in an E100. Especially if you haven't got a 60 TP, then this thing is, you know, this should be like the bottom of your list and get a 60 TP and then maybe an E100. But I think for the fun factor, E100 is definitely nicer to play. It's a little bit more forgiving in the E100 than it is in this thing. Because in this tank, you kind of throw everything that you knew out the window regarding side scraping, because you can't do that. Whereas the E100, the entire line you leading up to it kind of teaches you about side scraping, and then you go forwards into the tier 10 and continue that side scraping. But let's go ahead as this hurry free dies and move on to the big gun to see what differences there are. Also, 15-4 game. We love water tanks. And here we are on Paris with the big gun. We are using a 50-50 loadout, even though that I think for this gun even more so, if you have the credits, just spam the full AP round, because you know the difference between 250 pen nowadays, as I've already mentioned, is not very good. So this gun especially, kind of, if you want to get the absolute most out of it, spam that full premium round, especially considering you don't get a lot of shells either. You know, you only get, what is that? So it's 14, so we have 28, and then 30 shells total. So you kind of don't have a lot of leeway in regards to what you would select with your shell capacity. But here we have, so we're using exactly the same equipment as we did in the last video, the last game with the small gun. And at the moment, it's going okay. At this point, maybe we should switch the premium round. Maybe not. It's kind of the enemies are playing very weird at the moment. Like as you can see, they're making some strange decisions. But it's going okay so far. But this, I feel like if you're not going to be using stab with the big gun, you 100% need the directive on this, because the snapshot directive will help you out a lot. So if you are one of those people that doesn't mind the kind of bad gun handling, and you think that yes, the HP turbo rammer 100% is what you want, then I would suggest that you pick the directive for snapshot, because that will help you out. Here we have a little bit of a collection where either the shell doesn't go anywhere close to where I am aiming, or the conqueror in front of me decides that he wants to do exactly the same thing that I'm doing, and somehow he's surviving it because he's getting lucky, I guess. Want to try sniping the cupola on the conqueror is always very annoying unless you have heat. With AP and APCR, it's really, really frustrating to get sniping shots on the cupola for that tank. As you can see, it's not too bad. The gun at the moment is not behaving, as we already knew, again. But we're now just chilling. We don't really need to do anything. The enemy STB infiltrated our STB, WZ, and T10 that were in the bushes. And now they are kind of losing the other flank. I mean, the Leo PTA on the other side has already pushed all the way up, so we need to be a little bit careful of it. And I'm very cautious of the fact that the WZ that is in the middle could just come around at any point. Right? We have a Gorilla 15, who I don't know where he is. He could be waiting here. He could even be up here. We wouldn't know this because our team is not spotting that. And now that they're pushing through as well, we're minus 6,000 down, minus 5,000 down in health. But they're starting to push through this. This looks like it's going to be lost. It's not looking great, is it? I think, do we switch to AP soon? Premium round? That's actually insanely lucky that we even penned the VK, the VKK lower plate with standard rounds. Not so much this, I mean, we're shooting down onto that, but VKK's lower plate is very strong indeed. So we are incredibly lucky that that penned. Although, this one, I have no idea how this doesn't pen. In fact, well, I actually do know because I didn't have enough pen to go through the track and then the armor. But if I was using the premium round, that would have penned. So, it's kind of... You see what I mean about this, about 250 pen? Like, a lot of the time, it's okay. But then the vast majority of the time, it's just not enough when you're dealing with super heavies. Like, that's the side of a VKK. You should be penning that. So I think that if they buff this standard round to maybe 260 pen, I think that'll be fine. Because at least then you would have like a big enough difference in between. And also, the reason why I'm showing you both guns as well is because you would have to grind this the small gun first to then get the big gun if you want to then get the field mods. So it's incredibly annoying with those types of tanks where you're going to have to grind out the XP and then be able to do the field mods. So it's like when you get to tier 10, a lot of people just think, oh yeah, okay, I can go and do the fill straight away. With this tank, you can't, because you're going to need to get that big gun before you can do that. I think at this point, or very soon in this game, at the moment it's looking quite bad. Lower plate of an M454, lovely. That actually hit just above. If I show you, there's like 2 lower plates on this tank. There's this bit here, and then there's this bit. I actually hit this bit up here that was then not a pen at that angle, because if you have a look, this is actually sloped a lot less steep, but because of the angle that I was at, it's actually a lot harder to hit that than it would be for that. So that's why that one bounced. Even with the premium AP, I mean, this thing hits like a truck. It really does. It hits so hard that the only downside to this gun, other than the pen, is that you can't really perma-track someone. The alpha damage makes up for it, which means that you can hit them in one shot. And also, I already knew we won this game from this point, because I have more than enough health. As long as I don't play like an idiot, the game's won. So we go around, we wait, put one into him, back off, reload, rinse and repeat, and then it's beautiful. But the alpha damage makes sure that you can track someone in one shot, but the reload time isn't quick enough to then perma-track that person. So it can be annoying choosing between the two guns, because even though that the 300 AP is actually a lot more similar to the 315 APCR because of the way normalization works, it's just annoying not having that reload time to perma-track someone. And we've nearly used all our ammo in this game. Like, we've gone through a lot of rounds. And that's another thing that you may struggle with when you do use the big gun. You may run out of rounds very, very easily. But we have done 6.4k nearly and wiped out the rest of them. So 5 kills, 6.4k. Very, very nice game overall for this gun, especially with this gun. Would we have been able to do that with the small gun? Probably. But at the same time, we wouldn't have the alpha. So is the AMX M454 worth the grind? The title of this video. I would say yes. However, the grind itself can be incredibly annoying and frustrating along the way, especially when you get to that tier 8 with the AMX 65T, because that is not a nice tank. The tier 7 and below are all kind of okay, and you learn how to play with them, but the 65T just feels like you can't do anything in that tank. You need to really hide and then just hope that you can then get your shots out as and when you can. But with that turret, as soon as you peek up, you then get blasted and you lose a load of hit points. But I think that the tier 9 and the tier 10 are... I mean, the tier 9 is exceptional, but the tier 10 is middle of the pack. Unfortunately, when they nerfed this vehicle, they nerfed the hit points down from 2,400. And I feel like the 2,400 hit points would have been perfectly suited for this vehicle. At the moment, I don't think that the vehicle actually has enough hit points for its status, for what it can do. For example, you would compare this thing to a Super Conqueror or maybe an E100. I say the E100, yes, it's bigger and it has a lot more armor and is roughly the same speed actually as this thing, but the guns are very similar because you have that kind of faster firing gun with the 530 or 560 alpha on the E100, and then you have the 750 alpha also on the E100. So you have that choice of two guns, whereas the same thing goes for this, even though it's not quite apples to apples comparison. But you would compare this to, say, like the Super Conqueror as well, because of, if you use the 400 alpha gun, you have very, very similar kind of characteristics of the tank. So it having only 2,200 hit points feels very, very weird, at least to me. But I do think that it's worth the grind. I think it's worth grinding down it. But if you don't already have some other tanks, so for example, if you don't have the E100, you don't have the Super Conqueror, and you don't have the 60TP, I would grind those first over this thing. As much as I love the look of this tank, it's definitely not better than those tanks. The tier 9, on the other hand, I mean, you could stop at tier 9 and be very, very happy. Either way, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.